Hello, honeys. Welcome to your brand new Beesness. We've got for you here your recap from the first week of June, the last calendar week leading up to this Tuesday. It is a very thunderstormy day here in Madison after our beautiful sunshine yesterday, so if you hear any background grumbling, that's what that is. We don't really have any announcements or things to bring to your attention, so we'll dive right on into our stories beginning now. Before we get into your curated brand new headlines, we've got our follow-ups first, beginning over in France, where a new study says it is safe to ship the Bayeux tapestry to the British Museum. An in-depth study presented by the French Culture Ministry on Wednesday determined that the controversial plans to transport the fragile tapestry from Normandy to London's British Museum in September can proceed, as they do not, in fact, pose a prohibitive risk to the late 11th century artifact, counter to French experts' arguments against that loan. For those unfamiliar with this tapestry and why it matters, this is a thing depicting the triumph of William the Conqueror at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. It's essentially our only record from the time of that, and has been designated a quote-unquote unique work in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. But we've been following this story because of the move and the money, given the 2021 assessment, which found that the artifact, technically an embroidery, bears 24,000 stains, over 16,000 creases, nearly 10,000 areas of damage, and about 30 tears. We're surprised to see this travel green-lighted. The study does seem to have changed some minds. For example, conservator Talia Boujan-Bozide, a contributor to the 2021 and 2022 reports, expressing serious reservations about the possibility of the loan. As it stands, the British government has set aside nearly $1.6 million to cover the transport, although insurance costs and the exact route of the custom-built 1.6-ton climate-controlled and extra shock-absorbing transport crate remains secret. They will be tested 3 times before the actual move. Also, the expected ticket price of $32 to $45 to see the Bayeux tapestry means that show will likely bring over $11.6 million to the British Museum in those sales alone. So, very big deal that this loan is happening for multiple reasons. Speaking of France, Le Figaro tells us that a storm's strong winds damaged the temporary installation by French street artist J.R., which Artforum says, quote, drapes an inflatable printed canvas resembling a craggy snow-covered rock face over the entirety, end quote, of the 419-year-old Pont Neuf Bridge in Paris as a tribute to artists Christo and Jean-Claude, who had wrapped the bridge back in 1985, as we talked about in our episode on the couple of artists, delaying this new installation's public opening. The parties presenting the work have stated in response that a full assessment of the damage is currently underway and a new opening date will follow, which is a why we care in itself, but we're also anxious to see how this work's included sound element created by one of the 2 masterminds behind the French electronic music duo Daft Punk, one Thomas Bangalter, will be rearranged. We also heard that after 144 years of construction, the Pope will inaugurate Antoni Gaudí's Sagrada Família, designed by the pioneer of Art Nouveau. The famed church's Tower of Jesus Christ was completed in February, and Pope Leo XIV will visit later this month to do the honors, as well as to officially bless it in a ceremony set to feature some of Spain's who's who, like Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. This is all scheduled to take place on June 10th, exactly 100 years from Gaudí's death and coinciding with Barcelona's impending designation by UNESCO as a World Capital of Architecture. Looking a bit to the east, we have yet more Venice Biennale news. They're facing legal action after including over 100 artists in the prize competition against their wishes. A group of 67 in minor keys artists and 39 National Pavilion participants claimed in published statements on June 3rd that, despite first issuing their quote-unquote explicit request for collective withdrawal from its so-called Visitor Lions prizes via a May 20th letter, they were all still listed as eligible candidates when the Biennale distributed digital ballots to visitors on May 14th and said that, starting that day, they would take steps towards legal action. Statements from the June 3rd letter read in part, quote, we view this lack of responsiveness as not only highly disrespectful of the undersigned participants in the Biennale, but also of the audience, end quote, adding that, quote, to create Visitors Lions Awards at this stage is a deflection from the jury's resignation and in direct contradiction to the process we all agreed to when we accepted the invitation to exhibit our work, end quote. The Biennale Foundation addressed half of these allegations publications. It's disputed this claim of no response to the artist's request, stating to our sources that on May 28th it acknowledged receipt of the letter via email and clarified that it had kept the withdrawn artists on the ballot to, quote, guarantee all visitors their freedom of expression, end quote, when voting, but that, quote, these votes will not be considered for the awards, nor will they be published, end quote. We will see if these clarifying statements are enough for the artist threatening legal action, but I kind of suspect they won't be. We'll let you know either way. Turning stateside, the Colorado Sun tells us that Colorado Governor Jared Polis signed Senate Bill 133, a bill that creates a new type of limited liability company, or LLC, called an artist corporation, or A Corp, into law on June 2nd. Per the Art newspaper, the legislation gives artists legal tools to create a new limited liability company which will help monetize their labor while retaining their intellectual property rights. Some differences between this and a regular LLC include: 1. Artists must control 51% of the voting securities at all times, guaranteeing their creative control of it. 2. Investors may purchase shares of the company without getting voting power, and ownership units can be based on either financial contributions or in-kind artistic ones. This is extra important, honeys, because it enables every artist the chance to build equity in the company, no matter their current financial situation. 3. Every A Corp must define its artistic mission. And 4, artistic work licensed to an A Corp can never be transferred to non-artist investors or third parties. This means that even if the company is dissolved or sold, the intellectual property rights return to the artist owners, which essentially means they would retain their right to monetize it in that sort of situation. The Colorado Secretary of State will provide long-form articles to help artists set up A Corps on their own without legal help by July 1st of 2027. This is, honeys, an unprecedented and community-based effort which could have big results for local artists, so we really want to celebrate that bill passing. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a good news and bad news situation. The Chronicle of Higher Education reported that the New School of New York followed through on warnings that it would have to make cuts in the face of declining enrollment and a $160 million budget deficit. And those cuts involved dozens of staff and tenured faculty members. Working towards the goal of breaking even by 2028 and attaining a 4% operating surplus by 2030, the school had announced a shift from a 4-year model to a 2-year, as well as mergers of its various arts and humanities schools before last week's layoff of 68 staffers and 19 full-time faculty members. Apparently that was not enough. The new school's provost, Richard Kessler, claimed that these reductions in cost better prepared the school to handle any challenges, particularly further ones caused by U.S. government policy, but some view the situation much differently. Which is why we are featuring the story, honeys, the seriousness of the school's budget woes and the immediate questions of fairness at play. A statement from the school's economic student union blasted leadership for targeting faculty who'd actively pushed back against the restructuring plan, writing that the issues are not a federal government problem, but are, quote, the result of years of financial mismanagement, unsustainable debt burdens, declining enrollment, and strategic choices made at the highest levels of the institution, end quote. Meanwhile, and raising further controversy, its New School Free Press noted that their chapter of the American Association of University Professors pointed out that many of those laid off were, quote, tenured faculty of color, end quote, with its own association president Todd Wolfson condemning the cuts as, quote unquote, catastrophic to the university's intellectual mission. Which brings us to the second why we care. This headline is even more disturbing given the news of, while painting a picture of possible futures of many art schools under the Trump administration's proposed new arts master's program rules. Stay tuned to hear about those in our new news. Speaking of Trump, a few more legal updates on his federal and D.C. projects. The National Park Service ordered the removal of quotes at Bunker Hill after a visitor complained of quote-unquote woke ideology. As a result of the subsequent review of materials at the site, our sources report the organization ordered the yet unrealized removal of 3 quotes at the site, but not the originally offending one referencing women's suffrage. A spokesperson for the Interior Department characterized the removal order as a quote-unquote routine exhibit refresh, yet there seemed to have been an unusually high number of those reducing information at our national parks, monuments, etc. lately, as we've reported and as others have reported. In April of last year, many reputable outlets drew our attention to the fact that the National Park Service had edited dozens of web pages to soften or remove references to slavery, racial division, civil rights, the Jim Crow era, and other unsavory parts of American history, And we're now seeing that happen at the physical sites en masse as well. And after we learned in the last few weeks that some of the $76 million renovation costs of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool and other fountains were being met by the Trump administration's diversion of entry fees collected at national parks, we learned that the case is much bigger. According to National Park Service documents reviewed by several outlets, at least $90 million from those fees has reportedly been earmarked for a range of 250th celebration projects, including a $1.6 million fireworks display, which is over 5 times the event's standard budget. And we care about what the people think of all this spending. Advocacy groups, average citizens, and others have criticized the funneling of those funds as a misuse of federal revenue, pointing to the National Park System's $24 billion backlog of deferred maintenance and infrastructure repairs as the place that such money should be spent. And 1 week after U.S. District Judge Christopher Cooper ruled that Trump's name had been added illegally to the prestigious Performing Arts Center and blocked the administration from closing it for years of renovations, the Kennedy Center's attorneys sent a memo instructing staff to immediately remove his name from signs, letterheads, and email signatures and restore the institution's legal name. The remaining and more involved tasks, like removing Trump's name from the building's facade as well as from templates, brochures, and website pages, must be completed by June 12th. Interestingly enough, the reactions have been split on this, as with the entire debacle. Trump took to social media, calling Cooper an anti-Trump hater, direct quote there, and ominously predicting that the center would, quote, soon be closed, probably never to open again, end quote. And the center's vice president of public relations, Roma Daravi, told Associated Press that the venue would comply with the court order while, quote, evaluating all legal options to preserve this revitalization and recognize President Trump's leadership, end quote. But the more fascinating part, in our opinion, is where the Trump name will be next. Art News informs us that Israel's cabinet is poised to pass a resolution on Sunday to rename the Heritage and Archaeology Center, located within its local Rockefeller Museum complex and formerly known as the Palestine Archaeological Museum, after Trump. That's right, the Rockefeller Museum was established via donation from the American business magnate during the British Mandate, aka the period of British governance of Palestine and the surrounding region, lasting from 1923 to 48. That site, unlike the Kennedy Center, is not subject to any Israeli law restricting changes to its name. It is unclear at this time if that resolution was passed. And now for the brand new news. Circling back to what I mentioned at the end of our new school story, higher ed groups across the nation are decrying a proposed federal earnings test, saying it could decimate arts education. The Department of Education plans to implement a so-called student tuition and transparency systems and earnings accountability rule designed to measure the financial return on investment of postgraduate arts degree programs by July 1st of this year. That test is intended to provide students with economic information about the costs and prospects of their intended degree programs, but it really means that the programs in question will have to prove their alumni are earning more money than peers working in the same fields with only bachelor degrees, or else lose the ability to matriculate students who rely on federal loans to pay their tuition. The department had previously evaluated master's program eligibility based on the earnings of its graduates compared to those of high school diploma holders aged 25 through 34, but bipartisan pushes for proof that these programs make an impact means things are changing. Slowly at first, but now more quickly. Even Jordan Matsudaira, chief economist at the Education Department under the Biden administration, said the proposition was, quote, responding to a real problem in higher education that often prices are set in a way that is not realistic relative to a student's ability to pay it back, end quote. All the same, I myself am concerned about this sheer impact potential, as an analysis by the Association of American Universities explains that this test would result in major losses of student access to federal direct student loans as well as Pell Grants if programs fail to meet the specific earnings thresholds for 2 out of 3 consecutive years, as detailed in the test. The proposition has prompted public outrage against the perceived quote-unquote blacklisting of arts degrees as communicated in the nearly 9,000 public comments submitted to the department about the matter. Arts News points out that while consequences for students enrolled at the time of such a failure ruling remain undecided, critics warn they could be forced to transfer to other programs, institutions, or even fields of study, which will inevitably threaten the viability of smaller schools or academic departments. The leader of the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College, Tom Eccles, called this a, quote, doge approach to education, end quote, and pointed out the difficulty of objectively measuring the value of an arts education, while Robert Rosenberg-Kale, a New York Film Academy faculty member, wrote in public comments that, quote, in reality, those programs train the workforce for one of America's largest export industries, the media industry. A rule that strips federal student aid from those programs is, in effect, a federal disinvestment in the workforce pipeline for that industry, end quote. Others noted that freelance work may not be fairly represented in the quote-unquote gross income calculations that the test will use, and that particularly in the visual arts and music, where practitioners often do not achieve immediate post-graduation success, 4 years is much too short of a proposed testing timeline. I will reiterate, honeys, that this will have a major negative impact, no question about it. Today's sources found that even the most prestigious and elite master's programs in the world, like Yale's in visual arts and music, Harvard's degree in museum studies, the Juilliard School's music programs, would all fail the Department of Education's test using data released by the department itself. Hyperallergic specifically put the percentage of programs across the U.S. at risk at 44%, while ArtNet reports that 90% of religious studies graduate students and 100% of recipients of culinary certificates would fail the updated earnings test. And I'll say it, I have outstanding student loans, which are in part from my graduate program, and yet I'm still concerned about this increasing pressure on / delegitimization of the humanities and other quote-unquote feminine degree programs, such as, quote, professional degrees in healthcare roles largely held by women, including social work and nursing, end quote. Another area to see a whole lot of delegitimization in the federal realm lately, especially by way of controlling and limiting student loan opportunities. That does not feel very democratic to me. Nor does the new rules' elimination of the debt-to-earnings metric used in earlier accountability regulations in favor of relying primarily on earnings outcomes calculated by the government, which, quote, critics, including some of the country's largest education networks, say the government's framework does not provide a fair or realistic measure of success for creative professionals, end quote, according to ArtNet. So, yeah, we're kind of screwed. That is, unless we all work together to shut this thing down, submit more comments, and really make the Department of Ed feel the pressure back. We were also surprised to see Mega Gallery Pace make deep cuts to its artist roster and staff, citing an unfixable gallery model. The megalith, with 7 international locations, which celebrated its 65th anniversary last year, is laying off about 20% of staff and dropping approximately 30% of artists, so about 50 in each category, some of whom, according to Art News reporting, did not know about the upcoming cuts until a story about them ran in New York Times, causing internal chaos, confusion, and I'm sure hard feelings in the last week. The gallery's CEO, Mark Glimcher, said that while everyone knows that, quote, the whole art gallery art system became too big, too commercial, too impersonal, and too corporate, end quote, few are making these necessary substantial changes to adapt to the situation. This is, again, a pretty surprising announcement given the inauguration of its $100 million flagship building in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood just a few years ago, and its other attempts to position itself as an ambitious leader in the field. Apparently, though, Pace Gallery has buckled under the expenses of operating so many spaces, maintaining booths at multiple art fairs, and navigating global uncertainty. Pace's sudden closure brings the concept of the mega gallery and the sustainability of one into question, as Glimcher himself stated that this strategy was really only viable at a different time in the market. And that's an important observation to lean into with this ongoing market uncertainty and the disastrous collapse of the crypto-backed art ventures, of which Pace was an early adopter. Artforum describes this as the latest development in a quote-unquote tough stretch, which has seen similar and mid-sized galleries shutter, with even larger established operations pivoting from the brick-and-mortar model to private sales and advertising, end quote, supporting that idea of Pace. Turning conservative, turning to the reliable blue-chip artists, is the fact that multiple outlets have reported that those dropped were generally less well-known than those kept, meaning more benefits for established artists and estates, like that of Constantine Brancusi, which it acquired weeks ago, and less for up-and-comers and diverse artists like J.R., Nina Cacciadorian, and Glenn Kino. Meanwhile, president and CEO of Chicago's DuSable Museum, Perry Irmer, filed a 15-page request to dismiss a whistleblower lawsuit alleging that she and other leadership misused funds made by the museum's former vice president of education and programs, Kim Delaney, which shook the institution months ago. Delaney claimed in the suit that she was fired after repeatedly raising concerns about the museum's operations under Irmer's leadership, asserting, for example, that only $600 to $700 of a $5,000 grant awarded to her department by the University of Chicago went to the intended Juneteenth children's programming, but that the rest could not be accounted for, and that Irmer and the museum permitted alcohol to be sold on the premises without a liquor license. But here's the kind of wild argument that only a lawyer would make. Irmer's attorneys say that because Delaney did not refuse to participate in the museum's allegedly unlawful conduct, including the misappropriation of funds within her own department, she failed to meet a key requirement of the Illinois Whistleblower Act, and thus her complaint, quote, lacks the factual and legal details necessary to state a claim, end quote, in their opinion. We also think it's notable that the DuSable Museum, represented separately from Irmer, did two things earlier this year. One, filed a 24-page response similarly denying Delaney's allegations, and in certain instances, claiming that it lacked the knowledge to confirm or deny specific allegations. Yikes, you guys gotta do better documentation. And two, the institution had attorney Patricia Holmes conduct an internal investigation in February, yet the findings were not addressed in either Irmer's response or the museum's own filing, leaving lots of questions about what the findings were unanswered. On the topic of true crime, Maurizio Catalan's banana was stolen from the Centre Pompidou Metz, who is pressing charges. The banana duct taped to the wall forming his viral artwork, Comedian, was stolen from the French Museum on Saturday, and although staff sent out a media blast about the situation soon after, including grainy images of duct tape left stuck behind to the wall, Art News points out that, quote, little, if anything, was lost. Staff replaced the piece of fruit, inner quote, as quickly as possible, end inner quote, with a fresh banana and tape, end all quotes. We've covered instances of the banana being eaten and or stolen before, but the Centre Pompidou Metz said that it, quote, condemns this act, which undermines the respect due to the works on display and temporarily deprives visitors of part of the experience offered by the exhibition, end quote, in its legal complaint against the unknown parties, missing the humor in such hoopla over a single banana. On a more serious true crime note, Brazilian police believe they've identified the architect of the Matisse theft at the Biblioteca Mário de Andrade, naming the man they think masterminded the December 2025 theft of 8 Matisse artworks from one of Sao Paulo's most notable institutions, its second largest library, on the final day of an exhibition of the artist's celebrated portfolio of brightly colored paper-cut compositions. Police were quickly able to identify the 2 suspected gunmen who actually stole the items, with one arrest following shortly after the robbery, but authorities are certain that one Rodrigues de Oliveira Silva coordinated the operation through a network of intermediaries. Why him? Art News says allegations of this crime fit a pattern that investigators say stretches back decades of his, while a voicemail found on the suspect's phone contained the admission from de Oliveira de Silva that he was a quote-unquote specialist in rare books and is now getting into the art business. We found the headline notable because the artworks have not been recovered yet, and this insight could be a big step towards tracing their movements, if not finding them outright. The thieves also took 5 illustrations by Brazilian modernist Candido Portinari, created for a special edition of José Lins Dorigo's novel Menino de Engenho. We're hopeful that those will be found as well. Also in Brazil, the creator of the Jerry Gagosian and other art history memes, Hilda Lynn Helfenstein, was found dead. Local police have opened a suspicious death investigation into the May 31st death of the 40-year-old curator and commentator who built a following for her online persona and satirical memes of the art world. Brazilian television network Globo reports that her body was discovered in a hotel room by an acquaintance who went to check on her after being unable to reach her via phone. Helfenstein's true identity remained unknown until 2020 when she revealed herself to be behind the account, blending the names of renowned art critic Jerry Saltz and mega gallerist Larry Gagosian. May Helfenstein rest in peace. Our next story, honeys, is a little bit touchy, but I actually would like to hear your input on what you think should have happened here. The British Museum last week drew criticism for postponing a lecture on, quote, ancient history of Israel and Judah, end quote. The British Museum's director, Nicholas Kulanin, responded to the criticism over the decision to postpone that lecture by saying on Sunday before last that the museum's decision was, quote, not censorship, it is stewardship, end quote, arguing that the move was actually the result of concerns that the talk might be disrupted by protests after staff was, quote, informed that a significant proportion of registered attendees were individuals intending to deliberately disrupt the event, preventing others from participating in good faith and undermining the purpose of the program, end quote, while emphasizing the institution's responsibility to ensure patron and speaker safety. But of course, pushback was immediate from political and historical sectors alike. For example, the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, as well as BBC historian Simon Schama. Surprisingly, though, this came from both sides of the ideological spectrum. The organization Jewish Artists for Palestine also released a statement on the British Museum's postponement of the event asking, quote, what is the purpose of holding a talk on such a controversial topic, if not to invite questioning and debate? It is entirely legitimate to expect that a publicly funded museum would host conversations that reflect different points of view, end quote. Kulanin insisted in the face of criticism that the event was postponed, not canceled. The British Museum provided details of rescheduling to early June within days. So what do you think, honeys? If you were Kulanin, would you have let the event proceed as planned? Would you have rescheduled? What do you think your strategy would have been? Because we needed another reason to hate the billionaires, a floating art hotel's maiden voyage in Monaco was announced last week as well. The 236-foot super yacht called the Floating Art Hotel and touted by organizers as, quote, a world-first concept in art and hospitality, unquote, was anchored in Monaco Bay during the Grand Prix Formula One motor race while passengers boarded but moved on to what the organizers called the, quote, the world's most influential cultural destinations, unquote. Apparently, these will be Miami, Hong Kong, and Abu Dhabi. Its exhibition, States of Motion, includes several globally recognized figures, for example, politically incisive Iranian artist Shirin Neshat and performance giant Marina Abramovic, and was developed just for the vessel. Our sources were told it approaches movement, quote, not as an image, but as a condition, end quote. The why we care here... Honestly, honeys, I'm kind of mad I'll never be able to do something this cool, bouginess aside, because with just 14 private suites on board, the guest list is quote-unquote strictly curated. While organizers would not disclose prices, the suites were at 80% capacity by preview day on Thursday of last week. Also in the realm of announcements and discoveries, research by university scientists from across the UK published on Thursday in the Journal of Quaternary Science argues that the 6-ton, 16-foot sandstone block at the center of the Stonehenge altar was carried from northeast Scotland by glaciers before it was quote-unquote rescued by ancient Mesolithic people and hauled in segments to its current location in Salisbury, England. The researchers used ice sheet reconstructions to determine that a possible pathway from the Orcadian Basin could have moved the altar stone the first 250 miles. With lead author of the study, Remy Vaness, explaining, quote, what is exciting about these findings is that they could imply that the people of Doggerland, the spot where the stone is thought to have drifted via glacier, attached cultural significance to the altar stone long before it was incorporated into Stonehenge, end quote. But sources do admit that the study's plausibility hinges on the fact of, quote-unquote, multi-phase activity across large swaths of time. And as our football fans are no doubt aware, the World Cup is coming up, and Mexico's women artisans are hitting the pitch in an Adidas by Someone Somewhere social impact label collection. Someone Somewhere collaborates with rural artisans and textile workers across Mexico to bring traditional craft techniques into contemporary garments and accessories, and the World Cup collection will feature 7 pieces with hand-embroidered detailing created in partnership with over 150 women from Naupan, a municipality in the mountainous Sierra Norte region of Puebla, globally known for its artisanal excellence, in the words of our sources. And that, of course, honeys, is why we care about the story. According to our sources, they merge Mexican textile heritage with contemporary football culture through, quote, reworks of the trefoil logo, the Mexico national team crest, abstract fireworks, and floral motifs adorning the stripes across the shoulders, end quote. We also noticed the thoroughness of the support of this art form going on here. Adidas has invited a group of creators, designers, and stylists from across LA to participate in an embroidery workshop led by 2 of the artisans behind the collection. Sisters Catalina and Petra Secundino Perez during that stop of Mexico's U.S. tour. The sisters are the leaders of Mujeres Unidas Chacal Xochitl, the collective which, quote, has blossomed into an over 300 artisan network across Mexico using embroidery not just as an ancestral art form, but as a means of economic autonomy for Noha women, end quote. And of course, this collection is worth celebrating because it marks the first limited edition release of a Mexican artisan-made garment and brings indigenous craftsmanship to the world's largest football stage. Another bit of good news last week coming out of Bentonville, Arkansas, where Crystal Bridges has opened its massive 114,000 square foot, $150 million expansion designed by the institution's initial designers as of last weekend, with galleries debuting a Keith Haring 3D retrospective and Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Mirrored Room 14. The expansion caught our attention because it involved, according to the museum, a complete reimagining of its collections, and that is no small undertaking. The benefits of the new space also include giving Crystal Bridges the capacity to run multiple temporary shows simultaneously. Hooray, more art. And the Met Museum of New York contributed some good news last week, debuting a new free membership tier for SNAP recipients across the state called the Explorer Program, which offers perks like streamlined entry and special previews in collaboration with the Department of Cultural Affairs and the Department of Social Services. This is the next step in its notable increasing accessibility efforts. The institution became a Museums for All member by offering free or heavily discounted admissions to any U.S. visitor who showed their SNAP card in 2024, despite already being a pay-what-you-wish institution since 1970. The new Explorer program definitely is a needed one. Approximately 1.7 million of the nearly 3 million New York State residents on SNAP live in New York City. Yet, as the Department of Social Services Commissioner Aaron Dalton said in a press release, the institution can still, quote, create opportunities for learning, belonging, and inspiration that extend beyond individual beneficiaries to the whole community, end quote, by removing financial barriers in this same way. The timing of this is also notable. The rollout of the Explorer membership tier comes shortly after the annual Met Gala benefit saw mass criticism for its association with Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos and his wife. And our last story for the day, another feel-good one, the announcement by the Artists and Mothers organization of their 2026 Child Care Grant recipients. The organization was founded in 2024 in response to the increasingly difficult challenges faced by artists who are also new parents. It offers grants providing 9 months of child care aid to New York-based artists with children under the age of 3 to the tune of $25,000. And the 4 winners of this year's grant are Trisha Baga, Mimi Onuoha, Nicola Pottinger, and Sarah Swinar, who were selected from a pool of over 130 applicants. The headline caught our attention as a sort of unique path to supporting artists, and a quote directly from the co-founders of Artists and Mothers, Julia Trotta and Maria de Victoria, who stated, quote, the strength and depth of this year's applications made clear how urgently this kind of support is needed. We hope these grants can provide both immediate relief and long-term affirmation for artists continuing to build practices while caring for families, end quote. And that is our show for the day, honeys. Please let us know what you think. DM us your answers to the questions we have posed in today's episode. I'm off to play some rugby this weekend, our first summer tournament. Wish me luck. In the meantime, you know the deal. Hydrate or dihydrate. Take care of yourselves, honeys. We'll talk soon. Your Tuesday Beesness is researched, fact-checked, recorded, hosted, produced, edited by master's degree holder Celia Bugno, but you can thank Chris Meinhold, as always, for our highbrow honey music. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you stream so that you never miss an episode.